Sir, date please. Date please.
Date. Okay. So we've been studying this time, and in the last lecture in particular, we started to ask what happens near r equals to gm, at which point these coordinates manifestly become bad, and also even beyond r equals to gm. And what we found by certain amount of analysis was that there is a new set of coordinates called Kruskal coordinates, which bear the following relation to r and t of this metric, and that relation is that r by 2 gm minus 1 e to the r by 2 gm. So today I am not repeating the derivation, but I emphasize we have derived these coordinates. And also t is equal to this. And what we found was that once we make this change of coordinates, then the metric simplifies. It doesn't simplify, but it does simplify. It becomes a constant factor in front. Times this, then d omega square part and 1 by. And this shows clearly that at r equals to gm, so here r is defined implicitly in terms of t and x. So r equals r of t and x, and I won't remind you exactly how that goes, but there's some function. Okay, so the strategy is, first of all, we use this to argue that there's nothing strange happening at r2 equals to gm. Secondly, we notice that in these coordinates 2, something bizarre is happening at r equals 0, so there could be a problem at r equals 0, though we haven't proved that there has to be such a problem. And the third thing we notice is that if we draw x and t and ask the question, what was the outside of r equals to gm? What was the region outside r equals to gm in this? That's easy to find out because r is a function of t and x. Set this function to be equal to 2 gm, and you'll find a boundary of some region, and the region you find precisely is this one, which popularly goes by the name region 1. So region 1, so r and t in the original Schwarzschild coordinates span region 1 in xt coordinates. Now last time the question came that actually if we look at this, we find that r and t, the region span, r and t, correctly written, r greater than 2 gm and t span region 1 xt coordinates. Mathematically, it would seem that this region here, which is called region 4, is also spanned by r greater than 2 gm and t if you solve this equation. But the important thing to note is that these are two copies of the whole region. Namely, if I take r greater than 2 gm and t and all the angles and run over that entire space once, I'll run over region 1 once. Okay, so it's not possible to say that 1 and 4 together are equivalent to that outside region. Whatever 4 might be, it's a copy of it. Okay, but 1 is the original. So that's one point. Now, r equals 0 corresponds to an entire surface which is x squared minus t squared equals minus 1, and that's here like this as well as here, and this defines regions 2 and 3, and one of the many things we have to do today is to understand all these regions better. So it's difficult to write exactly, but when I write 2 here, I don't mean this piece, I mean everything from here up to here. Similarly, 3 is all this, 1 is left of these 2, and 4 is that, and 1 is what I've shown. Okay, good. And this diagram is called the maximal Kruskal extension of the Schwarzschild metric. And the idea here is that somehow these r and t coordinates start to become bad, particularly at r equals 2 gm, and so we transform to other coordinates, but once we are in other coordinates, we are free to continue them beyond the region where they were originally valid. Okay. One thing you should keep in mind is that when we make that continuation to these regions, it may be or it may not be that the original coordinates are valid at all. Okay. For example, we had some intermediate coordinates called small u and small v, and we'll see in a few minutes that those are not necessarily valid everywhere. So what happened? What happened is that in the process of making the transformation gave some rules about what are the values of t and x. For example, supposing t plus x is exponential of something. Remember, we defined some coordinates by exponential last time. So exponential of a real coordinate has to be positive. Okay, so that's a rule that's satisfied by the new coordinates, but we relax the rule intentionally to define that's why it's called the maximal Kruskal extension. In some sense, it's an option. Okay, but it's a reasonable option, particularly when it comes to adding region 2 into the picture, because regions 1 and 2 together form a very satisfactory picture of something, or relatively satisfactory picture of something that was mysterious before. Namely, a particle can come like this, reach this r equals 2 gm line. The description is perfectly smooth. We wrote down the geodesics last time in these coordinates, and it can merely continue on its way and reach r equals 0. Okay, so it's satisfactory, and it's also unsatisfactory to have a space-time like this where the particle comes and sort of ends, and its trajectory ends there and doesn't go any further. So it is sensible to adjoin to this region, at least this region, but we are not yet sure if it's sensible to adjoin regions 3 and 4. That's one of the things we have to explore. Okay. So today I want to make a long list of properties of the Schwarzschild black hole, and these are properties that are manifested either by those coordinates or by these coordinates or by some other coordinates. Okay, but for reference, it's nice to have the metric written down in all the possible coordinates we'll be using. So I'll remove this and I'll just put equals, and I'll write the Kruskal metric. This is just for economy, I'm writing it this way. Don't take, it is true that this is equal to this literally, but of course this metric this can describe an extended space-time while this cannot, so one has to be careful So property 1, supposing I look at r equals constant. So now I am in the original coordinates, Schwarzschild coordinates. I look at surfaces of r equals constant. What do I find? Okay, it's quite normal that when r is constant, then what can vary is theta, phi and t. Okay, so the surface that I get has two space-like and one time-like direction. This is perfectly what we expect because r itself is one space-like direction. So if I freeze it, then the metric having totally three space-like directions, it's lost one of them. If I fix r, so it has two more, which are the angles theta, phi, and of course it has time. So that's what the surface of constant r looks like. That's for r greater than 2 gm. However, at r equals 2 gm, we can no longer conclude that from this metric because this metric and these coordinates are not valid, but we can ask the question in that metric. Okay. So at r equals 2 gm, we have x equals t. Okay, in those coordinates, because if you remember, r equals 2 gm gave me the line. They gave me that x squared minus t squared is 0, so x equals plus or minus t. It doesn't really matter. One is the diagonal line this way and the other is the diagonal line that way. But those all represent r equals 2 gm. But notice that the coordinate x minus t or x plus t is null. Okay, so that means that r equals 2 gm is a surface with two space-like, theta and phi are still there, and one null direction. Okay. Now a surface with two space, a surface with at least one null direction is called a null surface. Okay. Moreover, null surfaces have a very strange property, which is that they are also orthogonal to the null direction. Because being null, the vector which is in the surface is also orthogonal to all vectors in the surface. So it's null. Okay, well, that's curious. What else can we say except that it's curious? It's one fact about this thing. Now let's try to understand this. Okay, this is fine. Let's try to now understand from the point of view of geodesics approaching this null surface. The question we would want to ask is, can a geodesic approach it? Can it go through it? Can it come out on the other side? What happens on the other side? The other side that we are after, needless to say, is r less than 2 gm. That's the other side which we want to uncover. And we can do it by considering incoming and outgoing geodesics, or ingoing and outgoing. I finally convinced myself that ingoing is correct rather than incoming, because incoming would presume that I am inside the black hole, which I would rather not be. So we'll be sending them in, so they are ingoing. Okay? And we've already discussed these in Schwarzschild coordinates. And if you remember, we had dt by dr, this relation we derived, plus minus 1 minus 2 gm upon r, where plus, I think, was ingoing. Does anybody remember practically? Otherwise I'll look. No, I think plus was outgoing. Let me write it and then we'll see. These are null geodesics. Sorry, otherwise?
dt here 1 upon that.
Is 1 upon that? Yes, it is. Thank you. Okay. And what about plus and minus?
Plus is also plus.
Plus is out.
On the non-surface, can we say that one vector is orthogonal to other images that and is also orthogonal to the same vector?
Yeah, that's good. So you have three coordinates, theta, phi, and one of these x plus t or x minus t, whichever one it is. That one is orthogonal to itself because it's null. Okay. And that one is also orthogonal to theta and phi because they are in linearly independent directions. So it's orthogonal to the whole surface.
But in that sense, it doesn't come in the same.
No, it does.
Yeah. And our
Concept is wrong, especially with longest with null vectors. Our concept is based on the fact that in Euclidean space, if a vector has square 0, then all components of the vector are 0. Null vectors are exactly opposite. They can be as big as you like, but their square is 0. This is a peculiarity of Minkowski signature. Okay. So this is the geodesic in this. Now, let's ask what happens as R approaches 2gm. As R tends to 2gm, dt by dr tends to infinity. Sorry, here. It does tend to infinity. Okay. Now, what does that mean? There's a very beautiful picture that's often drawn to illustrate this situation. So let's plot R against t, Schwarzschild coordinates. We are safe as long as we plot it outside 2gm and see what happens. And let's ask the question that very far away, what does the light cone look like? So the light cone in 2 dimensions is a pair of crossed lines, but actually there are 2 more dimensions which we never write, which are these sphere things. So if you just imagine something like this, that's what the light cones look like. You've seen this kind of figure before. And dt dr, okay, as r goes to infinity, dt dr goes to 1. dt dr is the slope of this thing, okay, plus or minus 1, I guess. So this is plus 1, that's minus 1. That tells me that this light cone has an angle of 45 degrees on each side. So this is 90 degrees, exactly as we always draw in usual life. And that's just because this metric describes ordinary flat space-time for R much larger than 2gm, so that this term can be neglected. So far so good. Now let's ask what the light cone looks like as we come closer to 2gm. And what this relation tells us is that dt by dr keeps increasing, which means that these lines which are 45 degrees start to bend until they start to approach 90 degrees. And they'll approach 90 degrees when R reaches 2gm, because then the slope is infinite, which means that they are 90 degrees. So the light cone is like this here, and very close to this, the light cone has become like this. And now it's not difficult to see in this sense why this R equals 2gm is null. It's because the light cone has completely degenerated once we reach it. Okay. So the light cone's close up. Just a phenomenon which I am noticing here in RP coordinates. Now light cone in some coordinates is not the same as the light cone in some other coordinates. We can, on the same diagram, if we were labeling this region with x, capital X and t, the Kruskal coordinates, then the light cones would do something else. Okay? So this is a statement about these coordinates, and the fact that they close up is related to the fact that these coordinates become bad. Okay, good coordinates should have good light cones. So these light cones, when they close up, become very bad, and that's the end of these coordinates, at least on this. Okay. Good. Now let's relate this to another phenomenon which we've already sort of seen, but we haven't specifically described it in presence of the Schwarzschild solution, and that is gravitational redshift. So up to now these were some purely mathematical statements about space-time. Now let's see what's the physics of light cones closing up or this thing becoming null. All the statements I'm making, 1, 2, 3, 4, many of them are the same statement made in some other language. First statement was that R equals 2gm is null. Second statement was that light cones close up as we reach. Third is that gravitational redshift gets infinite as we reach. So let's understand that. Luckily the formula for that is already known to us. So the only thing as usual is getting it with the right sign. Good. So now here we assume that we have two observers, one sitting very far away at rest. It's very easy to be at rest very far away because very far away from this object there is no gravitational field, it damps off as 1 by r. So you can always have somebody at rest very far away, and this is the observer at infinity. There's another one, let's say, who's following an infalling geodesic. We'll be looking at these geodesics more closely, but let's suppose somebody is following the geodesic. Okay. Now this person has a proper time and therefore measures proper time intervals in their own frame, and we want to relate this person's proper time to the time observed at infinity, or more precisely we want to relate intervals of this person to the intervals observed by this person. So the best way to do that is tell this person that you have a kind of stopwatch and every second you emit a beep. Every second in your proper time you emit a beep, regular intervals, and keep doing it until we tell you not to. Now that beep that's emitted travels here, and the fact that it's moving away from the source of gravitational field to infinity where there's no gravitational field causes the redshift, and we know the formula because we've already derived it. The formula is that the intervals observed at infinity, where the time, proper time is same as coordinate time because the whole thing is flat. These intervals are, so this is the same as proper time at infinity, is 1 by root minus g00 times the intervals reported by the falling observer. Okay, this you can say is T observer. Well, both are observers, so this is an infalling observer. Now, in is the proper time of the infalling observer. So this is the relation between the time interval here and the time interval here. So literally, this person is going beep, 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 and sending signals here, and after whatever time it takes to reach this person, the question they are asking is how far apart are the signals spaced? Okay, and what we find from this thing, this factor is of course exactly the factor that's getting large, 1 minus 2 gm upon r to the half down in. That means this is tending to 0 as r is approaching 2 gm. This is the time interval, a fixed time interval that the person is who's emitting is sending at fixed time intervals. Therefore, this person's time intervals are becoming larger and larger from this formula. That means as this person approaches here, the gap between one beep and the next stretches enormously until by the time the person appears to reach here, the gap has stretched to infinity. But what does it mean that a gap of signals has stretched to infinity? It means this person will never see this person actually reaching 2 gm. So the observer at infinity never, this is worth writing, never sees the infalling observer reach r equals 2 gm. you can think of this as the tortoise effect, which we saw when we changed to tortoise coordinates. Okay, it's sort of a similar effect. Namely, this person is saying, okay, this fellow took 1 hour to get 1 kilometer closer to r equals 2 gm. But next day wakes up and says, oh, now he's taken 2 hours to get another kilometer closer. Next day he's taken 4 hours to get still closer. So this person is saying, oh my God, this fellow is going slower and just dragging out the whole thing. And then this person grows old and dies before ever this person is revealed to have reached 2 gm as seen by a signal which this person is emitting then. He never gets a signal that the person whom he said goodbye to has actually reached here. If he doesn't get a signal that he's reached here, still less can he assume that this person has gone through. You need to reach somewhere before you can actually pass through. So from this person's point of view, there's nothing like this person ever passing through. It's a very strange fact, but it's a fact, and we have just derived it. And it's the same as infinite redshift, it's the same as light cones closing up, it's the same as this surface being null. These are just manifestations of one single fact.
But sir,
yes.
the infalling observer will see.
Yeah, now we'll come to the infalling observer. One by one. So that's the person at infinity. Now the same experiment, except now we are with the infalling observer, so that's my point 4. The infalling observer finds a very strange, okay, first of all, infalling observer can only experience things that are coordinate independent of our choice of coordinates. They have to be physical things, okay, and therefore can experience curvatures. And it's an exercise which I'll put in your next, I think I've already put it in your next home assignment, to compute the curvature of the Schwarzschild metric, and nothing special happens to it at r equals 2 gm. Okay, so I'll write the value in a minute. The infalling observer simply experiences nothing unusual However, if this observer is trying to use r and p coordinates to describe what's happening when he or she comes close to r equals 2 gm, he will find that it's becoming harder and harder to describe what's happening in these coordinates, and he'll be tempted to switch to crystal coordinates. And once he does that, then of course there's no problem, and he goes sailing through r equals 2 gm without even ever being aware of this fact. There's no bell ringing or any event happening to signal this person's passing r equals 2 gm, just goes. That's what I mean by experiences nothing unusual. Okay. Now this is apparently very contradictory, and it's one of the most classic examples of such contradictory experience in general relativity, which is that the person at infinity never even sees this person reach the horizon, but this person lightly goes through, and this can happen when there's infinite redshift. Okay, it means that what this person is experiencing after r, at and after r equals 2 gm is forever blocked from people at infinity. They cannot know it by any possible means. Okay. Now at this point, I will tell you a little story, but after the story, I will tell you why it's a bad story. Anyway, I heard this story from one Maldacena, and it's a way that in public lectures you explain the presence of a horizon to general public. And it's a bad story only because, and all stories like this are bad, because the stories show some similar effect, but there's no, in the stories, the effect can be overcome. While in these actual general relativity situations, in principle, they can never be overcome. You can't have a very high-powered observer or a very brilliant person or anything like that who will overcome this problem. Okay? But in the stories, you can overcome. Let me tell you the story a bit later, because I still haven't established that this thing is a horizon. I'm just telling you that there's nothing unusual going past it. But as you all have surely read, The important thing is that after passing this, our observer is doomed and can never come back out of R equals to Gm, which is why it's called an event horizon. That I still need to prove. So let me show you that. And so now we 5 R equals 2 Gm is a one-way barrier. And a very nice way to see that is to work in an intermediate set of coordinates called Eddington-Finkelstein coordinates, which are precisely halfway in the transcription between Schwarzschild and Kruskal. And they arise from a very nice requirement. The idea is in Schwarzschild, R is a good coordinate, of course, it's the radius, we understand it well, it's very physical. The problem is that things go bad at R equals 2 Gm. Outside that is very good. By the way, I suppose you know that outside R equals 2 Gm, these are the best possible coordinates. Okay, you would be mad to try and study orbits of planets and all that using other coordinates, as long as you're not planning to approach R equals 2 Gm, because these are very naturally adapted. They become very good at infinity and so on. You can see, by the way, that becomes very strange at R equals infinity because the whole metric seems to vanish at R equals infinity. So you see, there are advantages to everything. Now, Eddington-Finkelstein is the idea that let's keep R as a coordinate, but let's get rid of T in favor of one of the two coordinates U and V, which describes an algebraic. It's a half and half kind of thing. To get to Kruskal, we actually eliminated R and T in terms of two null geodesic coordinates U and V. Then we exponentiated them to get some affine parameter like coordinate. But there were two coordinates, small u and small v. So the idea here is pick any of them, either small u or small v, and R. So R is an independent coordinate, unlike there where R is a dependent coordinate function of P and X. It retains its independence, so the physical picture is very good, but at the same time T is gone and replaced by a null coordinate. It causes some problems for one's intuition, but it's very useful nonetheless. So let me tell you how this is done. So first I'll do the V-type Eddington-Finkelstein. If you remember, we had defined V equals T plus R star, where R star was R plus some log. You have the definition, the progress one. So basically V is a function of T and R. Okay, but we had also defined U equals T minus R star. So we went from T and R to U and V. Now we just go from T and R to R and V. So T is gone. That's it. As simple as that. Okay. So because of the definition of R star, if you remember, dr star is the same as dr upon 1 minus 2gm upon R. So R star is by definition just the integral of the right hand side. Okay, and from this equation we get that T is V minus R star. So dt is dV minus dr star, which is that. Okay, now I've got dt, that's the only thing I need to eliminate from this metric, and I'll be in Eddington-Finkelstein coordinates. So I have minus 1 minus 2gm upon R squared, not squared, and instead of dt I must write dv minus dr over 1 minus 2gm upon R, the whole square. Plus dr 1 minus 2gm upon R. Okay. Now what can you see by inspection of this expression? Something cancels. dr squared term actually cancels out. Okay. So it's quite a simple transformation. The end result is that dr squared cancels out, and so we get minus 1 minus 2gm upon R dv square plus 2dv dr. So as always, there's a benefit and there's a price. The benefit is that this is the simplest, this is even simpler than the original form. Okay, plus of course r square t omega 2 square. It's terribly simple. The price is that it's not diagonal. Okay. But there's a nice benefit from it not being diagonal, which is that you can compute the determinant of the metric in these coordinates and you find that it's perfectly non-singular even at r equals 2gm. Because what's the metric? It's minus 1 minus 2gm over r here. But then it's 0 in the next place. This is the dr squared entry, which is not there. And there are some 1s here. And then here it is that r squared and r squared sine squared theta, which is always there. That's the metric. Okay. Try to take the determinant. This factor doesn't even contribute because it's multiplied by 0. What instead contributes are these 1s and this. So the whole answer is something like r4 sine squared theta. Perfectly well behaved. Okay. And has absolutely no knowledge about the mass or anything. Of course, to be fair, the determinant of this one also is finite. So maybe the determinant wasn't the most important gain. The second thing that happens here, which is now new, is that if r is 2gm, this term goes away but doesn't cause any harm to the metric, because just drop it, the metric is dv/dr, which is a perfectly sensible non-singular metric for a two-dimensional space, just that both v and r in that case are null. It's like dx plus dx minus. Okay, if you ever used like Cohn-type coordinates x plus and x minus, which is something like x plus t and x minus t, then it's just a cross metric, perfectly well defined, even if this term drops out. In that, it differs crucially from the original Schwarzschild metric. So these are, this is the metric in Eddington-Finkelstein coordinates.
Sir?
Yes.
So here d depends upon, d is a function of r.
T and r, yes.
T and r.
So it's a new coordinate.
But is that the reason that we are getting cross terms here?
Yeah, that's of course the reason why we are getting cross term. That's correct. But once you've done the change, see, you're allowed any change of coordinates. Now remember, general relativity allows you t prime is t of x, y, z, t. T prime is t prime of x, y, z, t. X prime is x prime of x, y, z, t. Every new coordinate can be a function of all the old coordinates. But we shouldn't make up our mind what is the nature of the new coordinate until we see the metric. Now when we see the metric, we say, v is a triangular coordinate. Okay? And when this goes to 0, we say, okay, now v is a null coordinate. And r is always null. R has become null. That's the new thing. Okay? That means in this metric, a shift in r, its square is 0. If I just shift in r at fixed v, if I make a little change r to r plus dr for fixed v, then its square is 0. So r itself is null. That sort of prepares the system for the fact that when r reaches 2gm, it's going to be null anyway, because physically 2gm is a null surface. But by making r null everywhere, we won't encounter any new surprise at 2gm. That's one way of thinking. Okay, good. Okay, but why have we done all this? Now let's look at the null geodesics. This is always fun. Now you know how to do this. Given a metric, you can just read off the null geodesic equation by copying down the coefficients and multiplying them by the dot with respect to proper time of the coordinate. So it's minus this v dot square plus 2v dot r dot equals 0, where dot is with respect to the proper time tau. But we are typically interested in dt by dr, where t is the time. Now the time is v in this metric. So we are interested in dv by dr. And we find the following answer. Correct. We first of all find that there's, if we try to solve this for dv by dr, we have to divide by r dot squared. Okay? And v dot equals 0 itself is one solution. So dv dr equals 0 is one solution. And the other solution is dV dr equals twice 1 minus 2 gm upon r inverse, and which is ingoing and which is outgoing. One of these has to be ingoing. In fact, if you go back to your notes, you will see that constant V was invented so that constant V is the ingoing geodesic. That's how we defined V in the last lecture. So, no surprise that we find this. It's defined so that constant V is the ingoing geodesic. So this is ingoing and this is outgoing. Yes.
So that we have done this coordinate transformation, I have become
R is null in this metric, yes. No, R is null everywhere. R itself is null. You can see that, right? It's a like-like coordinate. But you have to be careful what that means. It means that a unit of R at fixed V. Now, of course, in terms of the original time, fixed V means doesn't mean fixed time. Okay, because time and R are correlated. So that's the reason why it was possible. Anyway, okay. So now let's look at the outgoing geodesic vehicle. So first of all, in these coordinates are for many purposes as good as the Kruskal coordinates. We didn't have to go all the way to Kruskal coordinates to make R equals 2gm regular. Okay. So in these coordinates, nothing stops us taking R and sending it right through 2gm to the other side. Okay. So here you can see the advantage of these coordinates. In these coordinates, you aren't allowed to send it through. Maybe you can talk about the other side, because in the other side, this becomes space-like, this becomes time-like. But you could talk about this metric on the other side, but certainly not the process where it goes through R equals 2gm. Here you can talk about the process, but R is a dependent coordinate. Here you can have it both ways. You can talk about the process of R going through 2gm where R is an independent coordinate. That's a nice advantage. And when you do that, you realize the following thing. The outgoing geodesic has a very interesting property. Geodesic has dV by dr greater than 0 for R outside 2gm, but dV by dr less than 0 for R less than 2gm. You can see that manifestly. This factor simply flips sign. Okay? Now that's a very interesting thing. Physically, what does it mean? V is a time. So time is supposed to be increasing. So this one says that as long as we are outside the horizon, when time increases, the distance increases, which is exactly what we mean by outgoing. Outgoing means that as time increases, we move away from the center. However, once we are inside, as V increases, R decreases. So the same geodesic inside is taking us towards the center instead of away from the center. So there is a sense in which the outgoing geodesic has become ingoing. Now it's very confusing because actually once we are inside, R is more properly, in these coordinates, R is more properly thought of as a time. Okay? But in those coordinates, R is null and V is the time. It's very, very confusing. You see that? Okay, in these coordinates, excuse me, V is space-like. V becomes like a space direction also when we cross the horizon, but R is null. Yes. Yeah. This of course always changes sign. So time always turns into space, but here space also turns into time, while here space is null and it remains null. That's the only new thing. Anyway, the physical interpretation is this, is that here's the famous picture now. This is always the picture one draws. It doesn't really matter whether it's R and T or R and V, but actually this doesn't matter. It's just R which matters, and R is common to both coordinates. systems. So outside we have a ingoing and outgoing geodesic. The ingoing one has the property that it simply goes in as it's supposed to without doing anything exciting all the way right up to r equals 0. The outgoing one, you would expect it's outgoing here, it's outgoing here, it's outgoing there, but it becomes less outgoing here because of the redshift. Something strange happens to it here, in fact it becomes stationary. It's literally the case that light following such a geodesic, if you place it at r equals 2 gm, it sits there forever. Okay? And it has to do that because after we cross it, then this outgoing geodesic now goes inwards. Okay? And now you can see that in this picture, there is absolutely no trajectory which starting from the inside takes you to the outside. Okay? Once you're inside, you can either follow the ingoing geodesic or you can follow the ingoing geodesic. Those are your choices. Both are ingoing. Okay? Both ways you reach the center. Yes.
The issue is, you're using Einstein-Finkelstein coordinates to describe the geodesic.
Yeah.
What if I use the Brustol coordinates to describe the same thing?
You can. Except that r becomes a dependent variable. Conclusions are the same. There's no difference in the conclusions. And I'm going to talk about Brustol coordinates in this context in a few minutes.
But is there the same problem of space going to time and time going to space? Or it's another?
You could wait a few minutes and I'll tell you. Okay. Good. So now for the first time we have the right to refer to r equals 2 gm as a horizon. Event horizon. Technical name. Because although nothing singular happens to a person passing through at the moment that they pass through, what they don't know is that if they were going on an ingoing geodesic, of course they are here, but they may imagine that over here they will make a decision to switch to the outgoing geodesic and they'll discover that there isn't one anymore. Okay, so there's no geodesic that will lead them out. Okay, and in fact causally the outside has become disconnected from them and there's no way they can go out. There are hundreds of ways of seeing this and we'll go on and on seeing it till you're sick of it. Both today as well as in the next lecture when I'll do the Penrose diagrams, which will make it even more clear in a different way. Okay? But this is the story. And now perhaps I can tell you just very briefly this Mallasena tale about the fish and the river, so you can just see how it works. So here's a river, okay, and it has a velocity v of the river, but v river is variable, and at the end of this there's a waterfall, and anything which is flowing along with the, carried along with the river will go down the waterfall and be smashed to bits. Now here we have a fish, you'll have to forgive me, I'm not very good at this, okay, that's a fish. And it has a velocity. It has a velocity of its own choosing. It's a fish. It can swim whichever way it likes. But it has a limitation that its maximum velocity is Vf. So Vf is not the actual velocity of the fish, but the maximum velocity it can attain due to limitation on its own muscular strength relative to the water. Okay. Now, V river has this curious property that here V river is less than V fish, here V river is equal to V fish, and here V river is greater than V fish. So the river is speeding up as it goes. Okay. So here's the fish, and the fish is thinking, well, I'm being carried away, but actually my swimming ability is better than the speed of the river. So whenever I decide, I can turn around and head off to infinity and escape the waterfall. While it's thinking this, it's drifting along and it passes this point, and now it discovers to its shock that its maximum velocity is less than the velocity of the river. So now it's not able to swim out at all. It cannot manage to escape. But it's not like at this point any huge blow was hit on the head of the fish. It might have been sleeping when it went through this point, and here it might have realized that is past the point of no return. This is just to illustrate that you can pass a point of no return, but it's not a very unpleasant place to pass. Nothing actually happens to the fish between here, here and here. The environment is quite the same. The bad thing is going to happen there. Okay? The problem is that now there is nowhere to avoid the bad thing, and that happened without any warning bells ringing. So this is the sense in which you see that this is a horizon. Now why it's a bad story is that for any given river, you can always invent a fish whose velocity is greater than the maximum velocity of the river, so it will always escape from the singularity. Okay? At least it doesn't violate any laws of physics. These are laws of classical physics. Okay? But in general relativity, you can't invent a particle or a field or any other thing which will go out of this. It's actually a theoretical impossibility. Okay? And due to the very nature and structure of the theory, due to the fact that actually, as we'll see in a moment, the light cone has tipped over in a very unfavorable way to anybody inside. Simply no way to get out. Okay? In principle. So the story is only to illustrate that one little fact that a horizon can be a harmless place. That's the main message of the story. Okay. You might also have heard about escape velocity. If you try to treat light classically and calculate its escape velocity from a planet, so take some planet and ask how strong its gravitational field should be such that light can treat it classically has a velocity lower than the escape velocity, has a velocity lower than the escape velocity, so it can't escape from that planet. You surprisingly get an answer very close to the Schwarzschild radius, that the density of the planet is that density. Okay, but again, it's not a valid argument because escape velocity is something that first of all, so you can't So the main point here is that if you can't talk about light in that context. It's wrong to talk about light, but if you talk about a massive body, then you can always accelerate the body. Your escape velocity is the velocity which is such that you fire something from a cannon and then let it go, slowing down all the way under the gravitational field, and it just fails to make it and comes back. Okay? You can mount a rocket on it and it will certainly escape. And in classical physics, there's no planet strong enough that you can't theoretically have a rocket which will overcome its gravity. It's only in GR that this property works. Okay. The third thing to be said is that conversely, if you're out here, it's not like you get sucked in. There isn't a vacuum cleaner here pulling everybody in. If you're out here, remember, at 3 GM or 4 GM, you can execute circular motion, and it's unstable, but it could be unstable to going out also. If you remember, it was on the top of that hump. Okay. So it's not like anything's very bad just outside either. So it is that the world inside is causally disconnected from the world outside because the whole setup changes when you pass this place. That's the key message. Okay. Good. Okay. Now supposing we are inside, you know that in these coordinates, it's obvious that once we are inside, then R is time-like. Okay, that's one more way to understand what is happening. If you think of R as time, then these are all words, I emphasize. The equations are more important. If you think of R as time, then reaching the center of the black hole is not a process in space, it's a process in time. You can no more stop it than you can stop yourself going forward in time. Okay, so that's related to the fact that this thing points to the center. Okay. You may wonder what happens to R in the Eddington-Finkelstein coordinates, which I have now sadly rubbed out. But actually, you can also see there ds squared is minus Okay, so what you can do is you can try to diagonalize this by defining a new coordinate by shifting b. Okay, define it so that you get rid of the cross term and you will generate a dr squared term. And what you will find is that the dr squared term is positive for r greater than 2 gm and negative for r less than 2 gm. So even in this metric, there's a sense in which if you want to ask what's the natural time in which this thing is diagonal, then you will find that R is time-like inside. So, yes.
So inside the electric horizon, if R becomes time-like, so it's true that T becomes space-like.
Yes.
So, I mean, space you can move backward and forward. Does it mean that causality is defined?
Yeah, that's a puzzling question, and that's exactly the kind of question which the best way to study it is using Penrose diagrams, because there the causal structure is very precisely set out from the beginning. So I think let's talk about causality in more detail next time. But what I will do is show you some little phenomena that are related to that fact. Okay. So I don't know what number of point I was on, but according to my notes, I'm now on 0.6 out of 10. So I'm fast. You could now ask the following question. Supposing I'm here and therefore I'm doomed to always fall in, could I delay that infall say by 100 years so that at least I never live to see the singularity? Could I make myself very slow? Could it be that, for example, the geodesic takes infinite amount of time to reach here? Okay, we haven't established any of those things. How long does it take to reach there? Okay, in proper time. Now for that, there's a very simple, it's actually usually given as a problem, but let me just do it. Imagine I'm a massive particle now inside the horizon, and so my x mu obeys the condition, so this is -1. Now I'm in what? Now I'll actually go back to Schwarzschild coordinates because I want to answer a question which is defined after I'm well inside. I'm nowhere near the horizon. I'm well inside, so I can use these coordinates again. Of course, I can also use those or Eddington Wittgenstein or any. But let me just for simplicity use those. Okay. In any case, I'm trying to find R as a function of proper time, and R is the same in these or in Eddington Wittgenstein. So this equation, of course, we've seen this hundreds of times, is this E dot square plus 1 over 1 minus 2gm by R, R dot square equals -1. Now, this is general, but if R is greater than 2gm, then it's better to write this in terms of, so each of these brackets turns negative, so I'll write it as mod of 1 minus 2gm by R, which is that when R is less than 2gm, E dot square, and this is minus R dot square over mod of 1 minus 2gm by R is equal to -1. So if I take R dot square to the other side, I can easily see from this that R dot is greater than root of mod of 1 minus 2gm by R. Yeah. I take this to the other side, I bring 1 here, then I multiply throughout by 1 minus 2gm by R. And then I notice that this is a strictly positive term, so I can drop it to get a bound, and R dot is greater than that. Okay? And that's really the signal. Now you know how long you're going to take in proper time to reach the center, the singularity at the center, because this, if I integrate, says d tau is equal to integral from, let's say this is the maximum that you could be from here to here, and it is dr upon root 1 minus 2gm r minus because R dot is negative, so it's actually mod R dot here. Okay, so mod R dot is same as minus R dot. R is decreasing with increasing tau proper time. So this is the equation. So I can remove this minus and invert the order of limits. Anyway, it's a very simple integral, and you can just scale out gm from the whole integral, and then it's something of order 1. So you can do it and you'll get pi gm. So the total time, tau, that you take to reach the center is only pi gm. It's not a lot of time. Okay, that's a bound. That's a maximum. So you could fall in faster, but sorry, am I saying it right? Maximum, maximum time will take to reach this. So you can't delay yourself from reaching the origin. This is the maximum time. And as John Carroll explained in his textbook, this maximum is realized if you are on a geodesic. See, this is the bound. But if you really want to maximize it, then you should be on a geodesic. So that means don't struggle, just fall quietly, and you'll at least have this much of time. If you struggle, you're liable to fall in faster. So this is the finite falling time. Good. Okay. Now probably this calculation I should have done earlier. Oh well, I'm not going to do it. I'm just going to tell you the answer, and this is my point 7. We've already calculated the curvature.
Sir,
Yes.
it should be the minimum time. Not the maximum.
No, it's the maximum time.
It should be the minimum because a light ray
Yes.
will take this much time to go in.
Yes, and
If
anything
you are
else will go faster. That's the weird thing. We are inside the black hole. That's exactly right. The light ray will take this much time, proper time, and anything else. By the way, this equation is for a massive particle. The light cones are tilted, so this is the maximum time. The fact that it's maximum you can see from here. Okay, r dot is strictly bounded below by 1 times this denominator. R dot squared is bounded below by 1 times this denominator.
Inside of the hydrogen,
Yes.
reusing the word
Yes. Yes.
Like
Light cones don't look normal, but whatever, they are exactly inverted because now we are using them, but t is space-like and r is time-like. Okay, but whatever r is, it's a measure of the distance to the center. So computing this still makes sense. The proper time is proper time. That is not affected by this interchange of t and r. Okay, but we get an integral over this, and you can interpret this as time steps or space steps, whatever you prefer. You can say it's space because it was space when I was outside, and you can say it's time because it's time-like. But it doesn't matter what you call it. It's just an integral, and it has a definite finite answer. Okay, we've already calculated r mu lambda rho in terms of some functions. If you remember, e to the 2. What did I call it? E to the 2 alpha was 1 minus 2 lambda. We never substituted these back, but if you remember, in terms of 2 parameters, alpha and beta, which label as general spherically symmetric metric, we calculated all the non-vanishing components of R. Therefore, we can, or in this case you can, while doing your next homework, compute this. It's just tedious, but you can do it. And the answer for the Schwarzschild metric comes out to be 48 gm squared over r to the 6th. Oh, by the way, this is a point where I should correct something I told you last time. I said very likely that there are infinitely many invariants you can make by multiplying r, but I didn't actually argue that they are all independent, and in fact they are not all independent. Huh?
6 of them should be.
Yeah, it's some complicated function of dimensionality, but probably 6 in 4 dimensions. No, it's more than 6. I think.
P input out of the
Yeah.
over the representation of the.
Anyway, there's a finite number of curvature invariants, but whatever it is, we are just calculating this one, which is the simplest one. There's no point calculating r mu or r because those are 0, because this solves the Frisch-Einstein equations. So this is the only one that there is any point calculating, and that's the answer. And this answer exhibits with crystal clarity that at r equals 2gm, nothing happens except this becomes some number over gm to the fourth. Gm is the only length scale in the problem, so the curvature has to become something of order 1 by gm to the fourth, because its dimension is 1 over distance to the fourth. Each of these has two derivatives of the metric, so each of these is 1 over distance squared. So whatever that number is, it's something like 3 over 4 actually. So it's just at r equals 2gm. So this confirms the picture that we have been steadily building up, that nothing very special happens to the curvature on the horizon, at the event horizon. Okay. On the other hand, at r equals 0, it blows up, which means that the gravitational fields are extremely strong, arbitrarily strong, near r equals 0. So completely consistent with all the other things we have. Okay. Couple more comments. Maybe this is also a time for me to ask all of you. I went through your first few answers in your homework, and almost all of you have used a definition of R which is opposite of mine. Now you are completely allowed to do that, but I hope everybody is aware of that, because for example my definition of the Lagrangian and the sign of R is correlated, so you can't use my Lagrangian and your R. If you want to use your sign of R, you better use it everywhere. So can I ask which book everybody has used to solve that particular problem? Because I think the answers seem very closely related. So just tell me what book, because Wald has my conventions agree with Wald, Carroll and my conventions agree with Wald, Carroll and
So which problem you
one second. Let me concentrate. Hartley. Wald, Carroll and Hartley. My conventions disagree with Weinberg for R by a sign. With Landau and Lifshitz, the space-time metric itself signature also differ. I think Weinberg also. Both have plus, minus, 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 and they have the opposite sign. So I'm just saying, you can do whatever you prefer, but be sure you know what you're doing. You don't get into errors. Yeah. Now what you asking?
which problem you mentioned?
The one which had to find, I think it was because to find the Weyl transformation under scaling into the lambda. For that you have to write out R explicitly in terms of the metric. And in my conventions, R, I, J, K, L starts with G, I, L, comma, J, K. While in your conventions it starts with G, I, K, comma, J, L. For many of you. I gave the formula, then in that case it's possible that I gave the formula twice. What?
Your convention was IKJ, right?
Wow. Okay. Then it probably means I've given income. Well, in my notes it's certainly not. I checked that 100 times.
Yeah, so
Sorry? You in my notes? Okay. Well, this is my notes. There must be some page of my notes where I did the opposite, but I'm not able to find it. So, am I wrong with what I'm handing out? Yeah? I see. Previous to lecture 7? I didn't. Okay. Where? Oh God, I did this?
Yeah, so
Which lecture can it So then later I did this one. I can't believe I did this, but okay. Okay, so in case I...
on third
Yeah, 3rd September.
I think you said something else, you wrote something else.
It is possible that I wrote something else on the body, but this should be on the website. Yeah, I think that must be what happened. Anyway, okay, please check lecture 7 on the website and get your conventions thing. Okay, I'm sorry if I wrote it wrong in the class. It is possible. It can even be proved. I'll check that. Okay, let me go on. Need to finish this thing. Yeah. Okay, point 8. This sort of runs counter to everything we've said. We've been explaining how complicated a space this horizon is. It's null and it causes all these things. However, the horizon has an area associated to it. And what is the area? Remember, the horizon has two, it's r equals 2gm. So it has two angular coordinates and then one null coordinate. Okay. So we throw away the null coordinate and ask what is, because the other two are the spatial ones. So in a space-time sense, the physical area of the horizon should be whatever spanned by theta and phi. Now, the surprise, in a way, though we always knew it, is that the metric isn't doing anything in theta and phi. It's just whatever it should have been for a radius r equals anything, in particular 2gm. So the area of this horizon is nothing but 4 pi 2gm squared, and that's 16 pi gm squared. What we learn, interestingly, again not a surprise, is that the area increases with the mass. Okay, but then we knew that the location of the horizon depends on the mass. So gm is a length scale and is the only length scale in the problem. So obviously it determines the area. However, what this means is that if I add some mass to the black hole, and if it remains a black hole, which we'll argue, then of course it will have a higher mass and therefore its area will increase. Okay. Now I just need to discuss one last thing and then I'm done for today. You might be worried about the following thing, which is we use Eddington-Finkelstein coordinates to argue that the ingoing geodesic is truly ingoing, but the outgoing one turns ingoing inside R equals to gm. Now you may worry that if I use the other Eddington-Finkelstein coordinates u and r, I'll lead to the opposite conclusion. If that were true, I would then conclude that the outgoing geodesic is truly outgoing, all the arrows would reverse. Something is very strange about that, right? You don't think so? I used V and R, where V, R and V, where V is T plus R star. But I can also use R and U, actually I should put this first because it's the time, where U is T minus R star. And I should ask what happens in that case. And it's very interesting. The equations are exactly as before. The metric has a slight change. U is again the time-like coordinate. But now it's minus 2 du dr instead of plus 2 dv dr as it was before. This is the only change. Okay. However, this change is important because now I find that du by dr is minus 2 1 minus 2 gm by r for the ingoing and 0 for the outgoing. Remember that these u and v were defined last time exactly so that one of them should be constant on ingoing geodesics and the other constant on outgoing. So v is constant on ingoing geodesics and that we've used to argue all this, but now u is constant on outgoing geodesics. Okay? Good. So this is rather worrying because first of all it seems to contradict what, notice that here the ingoing geodesic appears to change sign if I go inside. So we would have apparently, if these two statements are true, we would have all these arrows reversed and from here we'd be able to sort of swim out and sit on the horizon forever, which would be much preferable to being dragged into the singularity, but it seems to contradict everything that we just saw. It's a puzzle. Do you agree? If these are the two geodesics, We also seem to find 2 more with the arrows reversed, and we can't possibly have 4 different types of geodesics. There can only be the ones that from outside are incoming or outgoing. Whatever they do inside is determined. Okay. So the answer is quite nice. And it consists of the following observation. The full extended spacetime is given by Kruskal coordinates. So we should ask the question, what part of this or all of this do Eddington-Finkelstein coordinates describe? Schwarzschild coordinates we know describe this, and they don't allow us any smooth passage through this. We sometimes may use them in there, but they basically don't allow us any smooth passage through the boundary. There is also this line which is r equals 0. Okay. Now Eddington-Finkelstein has the following very interesting property. These are conventionally labeled like this. That the V comma R describes regions both 1 and 2. Okay, and that's why we have seen that you can have a geodesic which goes right through R equals 2 GM and ends up there. Okay, but we can actually prove that it describes both 1 and 2, because if you remember, the Eddington-Finkelstein capital V, which was t plus x, was also given by e to the small v. Okay. Now, if small v was a real coordinate, then e to the small v is positive. Therefore, t plus x is positive. Therefore, x is greater than minus t, and that's this line. Everything above this line. That's regions 1 and 2. The reason why there are other regions in Kruskal coordinates is that we give up this correspondence. Right? That's what it means to extend coordinates. That we give up where they came from and then extend their range of validity. But in Eddington-Finkelstein, we can only be in these because V has to have a meaning. Okay. Now ask the question, what the U and R coordinates describe. The U coordinate, capital U of Kruskal, was minus e to the minus u. So if this coordinate is well defined, then capital U must be negative. But capital U was capital T minus capital X. So that says that X must be less than T. X must be greater than T. Sorry. T minus X is negative, so X is greater than T. What is X greater than T in this diagram? Yeah, so regions 1 and 3, exactly. And now the mystery is solved. The geodesics we get in these coordinates are actually past-going geodesics which terminate on this singularity. And here it is true. On a past geodesic, you can actually, I don't know how to say, if you are going backwards in time, you can actually go out through this. Okay? So, things which originate, this part is called the white hole, this part is called the black hole, the interior of the black hole. The white hole is the time reverse of the black hole. So, it's a hypothetical space where everything originates from a singularity and then goes out. Or if it follows the other geodesic, it drifts to the horizon and gets stuck over there. Everything is time reverse of those angles. Okay? So therefore there is no contradiction. There are indeed 4 types of geodesics. 2 of them flow with positive time into that singularity, and 2 of them arise from this singularity, or if you are here already, then they flow backwards in time to a past singularity. So the difference is this part of the R equals 0 singularity is in the past, this part is in the future. Okay, and the U and V coordinates describe different parts of this diagram. We actually don't therefore need the U and R coordinates because this region is not at all obvious that there is any physical object which it describes. The physical object we want is the exterior of a black hole and its interior. Okay. We don't know that there is anything in nature called a white hole because the white hole would have to be prepared by creating some kind of singularity. It's not obvious that it's there. And 4, of course, is a region which is a copy of 1, but it's not causally connected. You can't use a timeline geodesic or any particle that is either time-like or light-like null, to access this region from this region. Basically, what you have to do is go this way, but this is a space-like geodesic, and no particle. A particle that goes on space-like geodesic would have imaginary mass, so an ordinary particle cannot access this. So this is also something we don't really need. Okay. So I hope this set of different observations has made it a little bit clear what the system is of interest, and basically it boils down to 1 and 2, although there will be an additional ingredient possibly next time, which is that there will be matter somewhere, right? This thing might have been created by some collapsing matter. In that case, this may also be bound, it may be blocked by the matter. Remember, we solved the equations in vacuum. We are not always allowed to do that. So that kind of thing we'll discuss when we talk about gravitational physics.
So the interpretation of region 3 and
Yeah.
didn't get it. When things are going towards region 1 from 3.
So this is the structure of geodesics, right? You agree that from this, because if you look at this minus sign, then all the signs of these things are reversed. This is the singularity, this is the outside world, and all signs are reversed. So now I am drawing the geodesic. This is the time reverse of the infalling geodesic, which was going here, which was infalling always. Okay, and this is the time reverse of the one which was the outgoing geodesic, which on the other side of the horizon is ingoing. Okay. The point is, if both these geodesics had the arrows reversed and they were in the same place, then we would have a real problem, because then it would seem that we can come out. Okay, but they are actually in the past. Since they are in the past, the interpretation is that rather things which are created in the white hole can come out, no problem. A white hole is the time reverse of a black hole. So far from taking everything inside itself permanently, it gives off, it forces everything it has inside itself to go out.
But in backwards in time.
No, so this way is backwards in time. The process is not backwards in time. Processes don't take place backwards in time. But this mathematical way of discovering the geodesic as leading to the singularity, that process has to be interpreted backwards in time, and then you get a consistent, meaningful process. Any other questions?
Is it like the advanced and retarded solutions which we have in EM? So here we are discarding one solution.
We are actually not discarding. Okay, so there are many solutions. First of all, I mean the general rule is that any second order equation has two solutions. So you can see that because the geodesic equation is a dot squared, b dot squared, r dot squared, and so on, it's going to have two solutions. It's really two sides of the square root. That's very common in physics. Here it's more complicated than that, because the VR coordinates give me two geodesics. The fact that I have two geodesics is what you said. There are always two solutions to the equation. Strangely, there seem to be four geodesics, not two. Four families. Two come out by studying the VR coordinates and two come by studying the UR coordinates. Now, the contradiction is avoided by the fact that UR coordinates include region 3 and they don't include region 2. Okay? Both regions are on the other side of R equals 2GM, but there are two different regions. In fact, they are understood well. It's very, maybe I don't want to add any more words to it. But really, what I think is that regions 1 and 2 are physical, that too up to the possibility of matter being there. Regions 3 and 4 are either unphysical or maybe someday if we find some situation which requires 3, then we may need to. Of course, one should hesitate to say such things because I went over Weinberg's book. If you read Weinberg's book on the subject of black holes, it's rather shocking. He says that, it's a kind of abstract hypothetical object, there's no evidence for it anywhere in the universe and so on. But if it was there, at least it teaches us that singularities at R equals 2GM are not real, they can be removed by change of coordinates. End of the discussion. Now I'm not surprised that the book is sort of gone out of date, because that was a really crushingly wrong prediction. I think black holes are the most important thing in GR rather than just a hypothetical example. Yeah.
In this case, in this case of white hole, from region 3 if we start in forward in time, then after crossing twice GM, will it which way is
to go? I mean, it has both the.
No. This one has out.
Yes, but
The
how do you-
outgoing. This is the one which is u equals constant. Nothing happens to it. It doesn't flip sign or nothing. It just goes. This one, what happens is that the geodesic goes, but it sort of ends here, and a different geodesic from here ends here, but this one coming this way is coming backward in time. So this basically the light rays which start here get stuck on the horizon from the inside, while here, here I guess. Here also, I think if you are exactly there, you are also stuck, because here also the geodesic is changing sign. So the infinite redshift will tell you that a light ray on the horizon is stuck. In both cases, it's stuck.
But actually, with pulsing, I mean, the
Exactly at r equals 2 gm, it will stay there. Not very physically meaningful, but that's what the equation says. Okay, well. Thank you. It may have some similarities, but the assignment will be uploaded on the website for any. Sorry? Yeah, you always find positive and negative solutions to everything because everything is second order. But